Welcome to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tata. Each week, we interview top experts in physical therapy, pain science, and integrative pain care. You'll learn the most up-to-date information for treating and reversing persistent pain. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe Tata.
Hey there, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Healing Pain Podcast, the show where we explore the dynamic world of chronic pain, neuroscience, physical therapy, and the opportunities for transforming how pain care is delivered. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Tata, and in today's episode, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of how a sense of purpose can truly reshape our relationship with pain and elevate our overall sense of well-being. Joining us today is a guest whose expertise bridges the fields of clinical health psychology and public health, Dr. Stephanie Hooker. Dr. Hooker is a seasoned research investigator, as well as an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health. With a focus on understanding the intricate interplay between behavioral and psychosocial factors in health, Dr. Hooker is at the forefront of pioneering research that aims to uncover the connections between purpose, health behaviors, and our overall wellness. We'll also explore the important relationship between purpose and physical activity, and how these principles can be applied to navigate the challenging terrain of living and recovering from chronic pain. Whether you're seeking insights into enhancing your own well-being, supporting others in their pain recovery, or simply curious about the science behind a purpose-driven life, this episode is sure to offer a wealth of knowledge and inspiration. So without further ado, let's dive into the captivating world of purpose, pain, transformation, and wellness with the brilliant Dr. Stephanie Hooker. Hi there, Stephanie. Thanks for joining me this week.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
It's great to be talking to you about this topic. I was, as we were talking about before this episode, before I hit record, we're doing some research on purpose and how that relates to things like living with a chronic health condition, living with chronic pain, being mobile and physically active. And lo and behold, some of your amazing research popped up. So we'll, of course, point people to, the researchers know how to find you, but you have a great article that's in the Journal of Health Psychology, which talks about purpose and physical activity. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But, purpose is one of these words that people throw around, right? Like you have to have purpose in life. You have to find your purpose in life. But I think it's kind of a poorly defined word in a way. So I think a good way to begin is just give us kind of your idea of what purpose is and what that really means.
Yeah, I think, purpose probably means a little bit different thing to everybody, but the way we define purpose in the research literature is that it's kind of someone's kind of orienting or guiding aim, kind of an ultimate goal or kind of thing that somebody is striving towards. And generally, we think that that's kind of outside of themselves in some way. Like, for example, somebody might be contributing to society in some way, or they might be helping other people, creating art, having a career or something that contributes to the world. And so that's kind of when people find their sense of purpose, it really kind of helps them figure out what am I doing, where am I going, and what's the purpose of me, right? And it's really an individual purpose.
That's really interesting. So you're, in that case, in some way, you're looking at purpose almost as like a behavior in a way.
It is. I think it's almost like driving behaviors in a lot of ways, right? Because we assume that when people have a strong sense of purpose, that they are going to act in ways that are very in accordance with that purpose, right? And you can kind of tell what somebody's purpose is, but if you were just observing them and kind of how do they spend their time? What's really important to them? So yeah, you're absolutely right. Purpose is very linked to behavior.
I like that. So you can kind of see what someone's purpose is, or maybe what it was at one time, just by looking at the things or activities or behaviors that they do on a normal daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, so to speak. I like that. Give us an idea of what purpose means, I guess, for health outcomes. I don't know if you can talk to both, and I hate to separate these two things because they're inseparable, but the physical as well as the mental health outcomes that we might see with a purpose-driven life, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really fun topic because the research is really emerging in this area. And in the last 20 years or so, there have been several studies that show that people who have a stronger sense of purpose live longer. So like that's kind of the first marker of health that we look at is like longevity, right? Like, are you living a longer life? And the evidence supports that. And when we kind of break that down to kind of why are people living longer, we see that people are less likely to have cardiac events. They're less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease or kind of dementia. So they're also less likely to have chronic illnesses. And so then it's like, well, what's really happening? And so that's kind of where I like to play in my research is kind of understanding, well, what are the factors that are actually predicting these improved health outcomes? And so we think that one of the things that's also happening is people with purpose are engaging in healthier behaviors.
Mm.
So they're more active. They're out there and they're sleeping better. They're taking care of their bodies. And then from the mental health side, we also see people with purpose or have less likely to have depression. They have lower levels of anxiety. They ultimately have better well-being. They feel better. So purpose is really kind of underlying all of our health outcomes that we're seeing, and we're just trying to understand what's really happening.
So purpose is associated with, let's say, a decreased risk or incidence of, let's say, we would say cardiovascular disease, but heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, things like that you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're seeing.
So purpose is good for your heart.
It is.
And then obviously you're talking about some of the mental well-being impact. I guess, I think you mentioned, if I was tracking with you right there, things like cognitive decline, mood disorders. So purpose is good for our mind in some way, keeping our mind healthy.
Yeah, I think it's giving people something to kind of focus on that is not, the day-to-day grind of what we have to deal with, like our stressors and, the little tasks that come up every day, but really kind of keeping the big picture in mind. And so I think that's why it helps with our mental well-being as well.
So it can relieve some of our stress in some way.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, so we talked about purpose in the heart, purpose in the mind. I know some of the research that I found online for you really specifically spoke about purpose and physical activity itself. Maybe we can kind of dive into that. And I guess, why was it important for you to first start to look at that area of the literature?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical health psychologist by training. So my real interest is in kind of how do we help people develop and maintain healthier behaviors, and in particular, physical activity. We know that physical activity is important for health for a variety of reasons. Like all of those outcomes I mentioned for purpose, physical activity is important behavior there. So we want to make sure people are engaging in activity regularly for their health and their well-being. And so I was trying to figure out, like, how do we help people be more active? And when this literature on purpose came up, it made me really think about, well, is purpose a factor that is related to physical activity? Are people who are more purposeful or experience more purpose in their life, are they also engaging in more activity? And can we harness that if it's true? So the article you mentioned is in the Journal of Health Psychology. We first looked at, is purpose related to an objective measure of physical activity, which we, strapped accelerometers on people. Accelerometers are just kind of fancy devices that measure activity on 3 planes. And we wanted to see, can we show a relationship between purpose, controlling for a lot of other factors, with this objective measure? And we did. We found that purpose was positively related to activity in that study. A reason that was important to do that project was that up to that point, people have looked at purpose in relation to physical activity, have just used self-report measures of activity. And it might be that people who are just more positive, who have more purpose in life, just report that they also do more activity. So this was a really important step in the literature to say, we can show that it's objectively related to activity. And so that's kind of the start of my research in this area.
And if I remember from that study, I think there was somewhat of a bidirectional relationship, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so it was a cross-sectional study. So we really couldn't tell, like, kind of what happens first. Does it people who are more purposeful choose to engage in more activity, or is it the opposite way around? Like people who engage in more physical activity experience more purpose. And I think that you can think about it both ways, because physical activity, we know it boosts mood and it improves, reduces your stress, and that sort of benefit is there. So it might be that kind of being more physically active gives you more of the mental well-being that you can actually engage and feel like you have a sense of purpose. On the other way, we also think that people who have a sense of purpose might have more motivation to be active, because taking care of your life with health behaviors like physical activity kind of presupposes that you have a life you believe is worth taking care of, right? And so it's almost like you have to believe that you are worthy to be able to put the effort and engage in these behaviors.
I love the bidirectionality of that, because it really does make you think about, the chicken or the egg. And oftentimes there's not a clear cut answer for people. It's just specific to, to their life. It's funny. I was just reading some research a couple of days ago about how we place, as far as exercise or physical activity goes, we place a lot of emphasis on, well, if you exercise, you won't have a heart attack. If you exercise, you'll lose weight. And those tend to be kind of longer. They're important goals, but they tend to be longer goals, which are difficult for people to, maintain the motivation for, because they're really, really long-term goals. Yes. And some of this research was saying, if we can point people to the idea that being physically active just boosts your mood, so to speak, that, and most people feel a sense of some euphoria, so to speak, just from little bouts of exercise. That if we point people toward that, they're more likely to maintain that for a long time. And then as I'm listening to your research, I also think that when we have a sense of purpose in life, we also get that same kind of mood boost. So you almost have like all these things, coming together in this wonderful mix to help people stay physically and I think mentally active as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that the research is shifting, like you mentioned, to kind of like we can get people to be more active if we actually emphasize immediate outcomes versus the distal outcomes. Because in the moment, when you're making a choice about doing an activity, that choice is going to be more related to your immediate outcomes, right? Like, am I going to get up and move? Because right now, like sitting and watching my favorite show is like actually quite pleasurable, right? But if I, how am I going to feel after I do activity? I'm probably going to feel a lot better, actually. So if you can get people to kind of focus on that versus the long-term things, most people can't imagine their lives, 30, 40 years down the road and what they're going to be wishing that they did right now. Right. So it's better, actually. I think what we're finding, it's better to focus on immediate.
So how I guess we touched on this probably just a little bit. How can a practitioner start to use some of your research findings in a way that informs their practice and obviously helps their patients and clients with these types of behaviors that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the best advice is to really get to know your patient. And, we say that a lot, but like, what's really important to them in their life? What is their sense of purpose? And you can get at that kind of by asking questions like, what are the things that are most important to you in your life? What do you value? How do you want to be spending your time? Those sorts of things can be really good, meaningful, open-ended questions to kind of get a sense at what's important. And then, kind of making that connection more explicit for them about why you're suggesting these behaviors, right? So, for example, when I first got into this work, I had heard a story about a veteran at the local VA who was participating in a weight loss program. And he had told the leader of that group that he was, I just don't really know why I'm here. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm only here because my doctor told me that I needed to lose weight. But it's like he was coming to all the groups, but not really making any changes. And until she sat him down and said, tell me what's really important to you in your life. And he pulled out a picture of his granddaughter from his wallet. And he's like, she's important to me. And she's the reason that I want to like be healthy. And I want to walk her, like be with her when she walks down the aisle. Like, oh my gosh, that connection, just like all of a sudden he flipped a switch and he was like, I am going to do this. And he lost like 80 pounds. Like, so I think that what happens is like, sometimes people forget like that bigger picture. And so as a practitioner, like helping people make that connection about like why you even care about doing these behaviors is important, because some people don't make that connection on their own.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, I can I hear like the importance of like the behavioral activation components that have been around for so long and have wonderful research behind things like mood and chronic pain as well. And I also hear more of the values clarification exercises that you get more in like acceptance and commitment therapy or another acceptance type approach. There are many out there that include values in them. So it's really great to see those overlaps. Does it matter what someone's purpose is? Like, do I have to create a big purpose of, I don't know, solving our nation's oil crisis? It seems pretty big, right?
Yeah. I think the literature is pretty agnostic to type right now. So I think that you can have whatever your purpose be. And I should maybe qualify this. Like, we don't yet all the way know. Like, if your purpose is some kind of malicious, like you're going to do something bad, that's probably not a great purpose. But like, if your purpose is generally like socially acceptable, it's probably okay. And so it doesn't matter if your purpose is to, be a strong person in your family, maybe that you're a mom or a dad or, a cousin, it doesn't matter. Or if you have like a career and that is your purpose, or even maybe it's volunteering, like it doesn't really matter. As long as you feel like that is consistent with who you are and your identity. And so that's where we are right now. More research might emerge that suggests that like type of purpose matters, but right now I don't think that that's true.
Tell me about, so obviously we're talking about the importance of purpose, and people get excited when they hear, people like yourselves who are highly credentialed, they have research supporting this, and they share this information with, friends and family and patients, and, things hit the zeitgeist and they become really popular. Is there a point where finding purpose can be really hard for people, and we have to approach this in a way that really is unique for where the person is and maybe what their condition is, and a whole lot of other psychosocial factors that go into this topic, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that, there was a great paper that came out a few years ago that talked about, in general, most people find their lives to be meaningful. They have a sense of purpose. And there's a minority, probably 20% or less of people who really struggle with this. And like, that kind of search for meaning or search for purpose is a big part of their lives, or they feel like their life is not meaningful at all. And so there are definitely some people who struggle. And, with those people, that it takes a lot of soul searching and like work, psychotherapy can be helpful to kind of help people figure that out. And so for the kind of everyday practitioner, it might be beyond kind of what, you can do. But I think that we do need to recognize that, there are some people who really struggle, and pushing them to, if they feel like they really can't identify, it might not be helpful. But I would say majority of the people you can talk to have a sense of purpose. They probably don't think about it very much.
Mm-hmm. And does it start to overflow into things like post-traumatic growth? Because I believe when you look at that model of literature, somewhere in the factors of post-traumatic growth, there's an idea of purpose in life, or starting to recognize some type of purpose that comes out of, not to be tongue in cheek, but the pain, so to speak. We're talking about, pain on this podcast, but trauma and pain are similar in some ways.
Yeah. The literature in post-traumatic growth and in meaning making is that people do find benefits out of traumatic experiences in their life. And, like most people don't even regret that those things happened to them, because they feel like they've shaped who they are as a person, and often, can change the trajectory of their lives in meaningful ways. And so, yes, absolutely, that we can, your purpose today might be different if something happened to you traumatic, tomorrow, right? Like, so I think it's important to recognize that it might not be a constant for some people. It can change, depending on their life experiences. And we expect that, based on what we know about how people cope with really traumatic events.
That's really interesting and helpful. So it's not a static thing, so to speak. Purpose can change throughout your life. Changes maybe, look, if you're in college and you're really busy with university, purpose may be different than if you are newly married and having your first child, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it definitely changes with our seasons of life.
Yeah, and it takes the pressure off of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have the idea that my life has to be 100% purposeful at all times. And if it's not, then potentially there's something wrong with me, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, late adolescence and early adulthood, people struggle with this a lot, right? Like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to make this contribute? And it's okay not to know right away. I think, as people age, they kind of grow into that. And especially in older adulthood, we see that people kind of have figured it out. Most people figured it out. And then they can look back on their life and say, yeah, this is what I did. And that meaning making at the end of life is an important kind of developmental milestone for people.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the idea of having curiosity and exploring some of these things and realizing that you're probably not just going to listen to this podcast and boom, I have my purpose now. It could take, as you mentioned, everything from just curiosity, exploration, personal development, psychotherapy, all those could be important parts of someone's journey.
Absolutely.
I want to kind of just maybe, I know a lot of the research is building in this area, but I want to kind of dial it down probably a little bit along the lines of the post-traumatic growth part. But is finding a purpose, and again, to be a little more tongue in cheek, is finding a purpose in your pain, so to speak, or finding a purpose in your health condition, whether that's an acute or a chronic health condition. Is there some research there to support that? And what does that, I guess, really mean to all of us who are listening?
Yeah, I think that, I don't necessarily call it purpose when we bring it down to like a chronic pain condition or something like that. But we think about your kind of identity as a person with this illness. And sometimes research has shown that people kind of who identify with their illness a little bit more are more likely to kind of take care of it, manage it, and kind of it generally generates better outcomes. I know that research a little bit more in diabetes with, people with diabetes who identify with diabetes. They're more likely to check their blood sugar. They're more likely to, take their medications, do their other behaviors that they're supposed to do to take care of themselves. And so I think what we can see in chronic pain, at least, you mentioned the behavioral activation literature, is that when people recognize chronic pain as kind of something that they have control over, they're able to kind of break out of that chronic pain cycle, where often we disengage from activity because of fear that it's going to cause pain, and that leads to immobility, and then therefore immobility causes more pain. And, it's just this vicious cycle. But if you can kind of step out of that and activate and engage with your purpose, engage with things that you find meaningful in your life, then ultimately we think that that is going to be beneficial to improving kind of your experience with pain and reducing the effect that pain interferes with your life.
Could purpose be a missing link in the behavioral activation literature?
It's something that I've been exploring. So we published one study in just a pilot with people with chronic pain, actually, where we looked at values-based behavioral activation, where we really tried to kind of help people identify kind of more of a purpose-driven behavioral activation model. And we've been exploring that more recently in people with opioid use disorder as well. So trying to get people to engage with purpose is something we're really hoping would enhance kind of a general behavioral activation, right? Because behavioral activation is designed to get people out, get people moving, doing pleasurable activities. But we think that when you're engaging with activities that are really connected to what you value and you find purposeful and meaningful in your life, that's even going to have a more powerful effect.
Right. So there's a difference, and that's a key difference, I think, between engaging in pleasurable activities, like listening to music, versus engaging with purposeful activity.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that paper available for our readers to access?
It is. It was published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology in Medical Settings. And I can send you the link.
Yeah, please do. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes and include it. And I love the interplay there because I think I haven't read the study, but it sounds like you're bringing in more the, traditional behavioral activation, CBT components with more the contextual behavioral aspects of purpose and things you might find in ACT and other types of approaches, which is great. And I'm always encouraging providers to try to start to synthesize all these things together, which can be difficult at first, but things can blend nicely once you start to explore them.
it's very consistent with the idea of committed action in ACT. And so like getting people to engage in activities that they value and find meaningful, regardless of how they feel. And that's the same kind of approach.
Stephanie, it's been great speaking with you today about purpose in life and how it impacts our physical, mental, and of course, our overall well-being. I'm excited to hear that it could also impact our longevity. I learned that today. And how it impacts our mind, our heart, and our body. So we love all that. Bringing the mind and body together is something that we love to do on this podcast. So we appreciate and thank you for that. Let all of our listeners and viewers know how they can learn more about you and follow your work.
Yeah, so I am a research investigator at HealthPartners in Minneapolis. And so I have a profile on our HealthPartners Institute webpage, and I have ResearchGate and Google Scholar. So feel free to email me or reach out if you have questions.
Great. So we will, of course, include all those links that we mentioned today, as well as the website link at healthpartners.com, where you can search and find Stephanie there. We'll include that in the show notes on the podcast over at the Integrated Pain Science Institute. So make sure to go there and check it out. I want to thank Stephanie again for joining us this week and talking about purpose. Make sure to share this episode with your friends and family and colleagues on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're hanging out, talking about purpose and, of course, its impact on health and well-being. I'm Dr. Joe Tada. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tada. To subscribe to the podcast and learn more, visit integrativepainscienceinstitute.com. That's integrativepainscienceinstitute.com. Sign up to receive weekly updates, leave a review on iTunes, and share this episode with your friends.